Welcome to Ash Roadz. This is not the story of how the world ended, but of what came after, a silence that swept across cities, the collapse of order, the unravelling of everything familiar. Roads once filled with life became graveyards of steel and ash. In this silence, we follow John, a hiker, a husband, an ordinary man who stepped onto the trail one morning and returned to find the world forever changed. With nothing but the pack on his back and the memory of a promise made to his wife, he must walk the broken roads, face desperate strangers, and endure a wilderness where humanity itself has turned savage. Ash Roadz is a story of survival, loss, and the fragile thread of hope that binds us together when everything else is gone. Chapter 1. The Last Goodbye. John zipped the last compartment of his pack and gave it a satisfied pat. Everything was in its place: tent, sleeping bag, rations, water filter, even the battered compass he'd had since his Boy Scout days. He liked things orderly before he set out. The trail had a way of throwing enough chaos at him without him adding to it. The smell of coffee drifted through the kitchen as he hoisted the pack upright. Claire stood at the counter, in her robe, pouring 2 mugs. She always made his extra strong when he left for a trip. "You sure you've got everything?" she asked, sliding the mug toward him. John took a sip, grimaced at the bitterness, and grinned. "I've checked it 3 times. If I don't have it now, I'll just have to live without it." Claire rolled her eyes, but there was a softness in it. She leaned against the counter, studying him. "A week feels like a long time." "It always does at first," John said, setting the mug down. He crossed the kitchen, pulling her into his arms. She fit perfectly against him, just as she always had. He kissed the top of her head and rested his chin there. "But I'll be back before you know it. You won't even have time to miss me." Her voice was quiet when she answered. "I always miss you." That gave him pause. He pulled back just enough to see her face. Her smile was there, but it was fragile, like glass held too tightly. He brushed a thumb along her cheek. "Hey, it's just a hike. I'll be back before the coffee beans run out." That earned a laugh, light and real. She squeezed his hand. "You'd better. Don't make me drink the decaf." They lingered like that for a while, neither rushing the moment. Finally, John slung the pack over his shoulders, adjusting the straps with a practiced tug. At the door, he looked back. Claire stood in the morning light, hair falling loose from her braid, one hand resting on the edge of the counter as if she needed the support. "Goodbye, Claire," he said softly. Her eyes shone as she gave him a brave smile. "Come back to me." "I always do." With that, John stepped out into the fresh air, unaware that this hike would be unlike any he had ever taken before. Chapter 2. Into the Wild. The first day passed in a rhythm John knew, by heart boots pressing the dirt, the creak of straps with every step, the steady sound of his own breath. The forest was alive with early summer light, shafts of sun cutting through the canopy and dappling the ground in gold. He stopped at a ridge by midday, pulling his pack off and sitting against a smooth boulder. From here, the valley stretched out wide rolling hills clothed in green, a silver ribbon of river winding through the distance. He chewed on a strip of jerky and thought of Claire. She would be back at the house now, maybe working in her little garden, maybe reading on the porch. He pulled out his phone to snap a picture, the kind of shot she liked him to send. No bars. He wasn't surprised half the reason he hiked was to be away from the endless buzzing of the world. He snapped the photo anyway, tucking it away for later. By evening, he had made camp near a small clearing. The fire crackled low, and he watched sparks drift upward into the darkening sky. It felt good, the familiar peace of the wilderness, pressing in, quieting the noise in his head. The second morning, he woke to birdsong and the soft rustle of leaves. As he broke down camp, he noticed something odd, the silence beneath the birds. No distant hum of planes, no far-off drone of highways, just stillness. He frowned, but shook it off. Maybe it was nothing. Hours into his hike, climbing higher into the ridgeline, he stopped to catch his breath. The air felt different, thicker. He pulled his canteen from his pack. But before he drank, a low sound reached him. Not thunder, not wind. It was deeper, heavier, a rolling boom that made the earth tremble beneath his boots. He froze. The birds had gone silent. Turning, he looked out over the valley. A dark column was rising on the horizon. Not a storm, not smoke from a campfire. This was massive, thick, spreading. The ground shuddered again, a pulse that rattled the stones at his feet. He gripped a nearby tree to steady himself. "What the hell?" he whispered. For the first time, the thought struck him. Whatever was happening, it was far bigger than him. And Claire was still back there, miles away, in a world that suddenly felt like it was breaking apart. John tightened his straps and started moving faster. The weight of his pack pressing into his shoulders like a burden he couldn't set down. The hike was no longer a retreat. It was the beginning of survival. Chapter 3. The First Signs. By the third day, John's legs ached with the familiar burn of long miles. But his mind wasn't on the trail anymore. The column of smoke he'd seen the day before still lingered in the distance, sprawling wider, blacker. Every time he glanced back, it seemed to crawl across more of the horizon. He told himself it could be wildfires those happened in the summers out west. But deep down, he knew this was different. Around noon, he stopped near a small stream to refill his canteen. Kneeling in the cool water, he heard it. A faint, metallic buzz. He pulled out his phone again, even though he didn't expect much. The screen flickered. No service. But for the first time since he left, something else appeared, a line of text at the top. Emergency broadcast alert. His stomach dropped. He tapped it, but the screen froze, then went black. The phone wouldn't turn back on. He sat there for a long moment, listening to the gurgle of the stream, heart hammering. It was real. Whatever was happening wasn't just smoke on the horizon. It was everywhere. That evening, John stumbled onto something that erased any hope of normal. He was cutting through a long meadow when he heard the sound, low, steady, mechanical. Relief bloomed in him. A plane. Civilization. Proof that he wasn't alone in the woods while the world crumbled. He dropped his pack and craned his neck, scanning the skies. Then he saw it. A jetliner, massive and silver in the late sunlight, descending far too fast. Its engines coughed black smoke. For a few seconds, it hung there, tilted, groaning like a dying animal, and then too far away to hear the impact, but close enough to see the bloom of fire. It went down beyond the ridgeline. The meadow was silent again, the kind of silence that swallowed everything whole. John's hands shook as he grabbed his pack. For the first time he realized he wasn't hiking back home. There was no back anymore. Whatever he'd known when he kissed Claire goodbye was gone. The world had ended, and he was in the middle of the wilderness, with nothing but what he carried on his back. Chapter 4. The Test. John pushed hard into the fourth day, his pack digging deeper into his shoulders than it ever had before. Normally he would have stopped often to rest, maybe even linger at a scenic overlook, but not now. Every shadow felt heavier, every sound sharper. He had no destination, just the instinct to keep moving. By late afternoon, clouds rolled in, thick and grey. A storm threatened, and John knew he couldn't risk being caught exposed. He scanned the tree line until he spotted a break. An old hunting cabin, half swallowed by vines. Cautious, he approached. The door hung crooked on its hinges, one window cracked. Inside, it smelled of dust and mildew, but it was shelter. He set his pack down, and began checking the corners the way he'd seen in old survival guides, half expecting raccoons, or worse. It was empty. He built a small fire in the rusted iron stove, using dry twigs from beneath the eaves. As the flames caught, warmth spread through the cabin, chasing away the damp chill. For a moment, it almost felt safe. That illusion shattered when he heard the footsteps. Not animal, human, slow, deliberate crunches of boots on leaves outside. John froze, hand instinctively going to the hatchet strapped to his pack. He crept to the window, peering out through a crack in the curtain. Two figures emerged from the trees, a man and a woman, both ragged, both carrying more desperation than supplies. Their clothes were torn, their faces streaked with dirt. The woman clutched something wrapped in a blanket food, maybe, or a child. John's heart pounded. He could hide, wait them out, or he could reveal himself. The thought of other people was both comforting and terrifying. Out here, trust could be more dangerous than solitude. The footsteps grew closer. The man tested the door, rattling the loose hinge. John tightened his grip on the hatchet. This was no longer a hike. This was survival, and every decision could mean life or death. Chapter 4. The Test. The man jiggled the handle again, harder this time. The wood groaned, the sound carrying through the thin cabin walls. John's pulse thundered in his ears. He gripped the hatchet tighter, sweat sliding down his palms despite the cool evening air. The woman said something in a low voice, too quiet for him to make out, but it was enough to still the man's hand. They both lingered on the porch, silent except for the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. John's breath came slow and shallow. His instinct screamed at him to stay hidden. Let them leave. Let them think the cabin was abandoned. But another part of him, the part that hated the loneliness of the last few days, that longed for another human voice, ached to open the door and say something. The man pressed his face to the crack of the window, squinting into the dark interior. John stepped back fast, heart slamming. He hadn't been seen, but it was close. Then came the words. "We know you're in there." The voice was steady, but worn like gravel under boots. "We don't want trouble, just shelter, one night." The woman shifted the bundle in her arms. The blanket slipped, and John's eyes widened when he saw the pale face of a child, maybe 6, maybe 7, thin as kindling and asleep in her mother's arms. For a long moment, no one moved. Finally, John exhaled. His grip on the hatchet loosened, though he didn't let go completely. He crossed to the door, lifted the latch, and opened it just enough to show his face. The man tensed, his eyes flicking to the weapon in John's hand. The woman pulled the child closer, as though shielding her from what might come next. "Just you two?" John asked, voice low. The man nodded. "Her, me, and the girl." John studied them, searching for deception. He saw exhaustion, hunger, and a bone-deep fear that mirrored his own. No guns, no bulging packs, just survivors with nothing left but each other. Reluctantly, John stepped back. "Come in." The door creaked wider, and the strangers entered. The man closed it behind them, careful not to slam it. Inside the dim light, the woman lowered the child to a corner near the stove. She stirred faintly, but did not wake. The man stood near the door, his gaze never leaving John. "I'm Mark," he said after a pause. He motioned toward the woman. "This is Anna, and that's Lily." "John?" No one offered hands to shake. The hours stretched long. Mark and Anna sat close to the stove, whispering to each other, while Lily slept curled against her mother. John stayed by the opposite wall, hatchet resting against his thigh. He didn't close his eyes once. Outside, the storm finally broke. Rain lashed against the windows, wind howling through the trees. The little cabin shook with every gust, but the fire held. It wasn't until dawn that John eased his grip on the hatchet. The storm had passed, leaving only the steady drip of water from the eaves. Anna stirred first, rising to check on Lily. The girl blinked awake, rubbing her eyes, her face pale but alert. For the first time, John saw the faint smile of a child who still trusted her mother to make everything right. Mark broke the silence. We were in town when it started. Power went out first. Then the phones. By the second day, people were panicking, fighting over gas, food, anything they could grab. His jaw tightened. We got out before it got worse. Headed for the woods. Figured we'd have a better chance here. John listened without interrupting. When Mark finished, he asked the only question that mattered. How bad? Mark's eyes hardened. Bad enough there's no going back. Cities are burning. Highways are blocked with wrecks. Military tried to hold things down, but either they're gone or they're fighting for themselves now. Anna's voice cracked as she spoke. We've seen things. People hurting each other. Worse. This isn't just a blackout. The world, it's gone. John said nothing. He thought of Claire, her brave smile, her soft voice telling him to come back to her. He wondered if she was alive, if their neighbourhood was still standing, if she was sitting by the radio, waiting for a message that would never come. The silence grew heavy, broken only by the crackle of the stove. Finally, John stood. I'm going north, back toward home. Mark looked at him sharply. You'll never make it, not if what I've seen stretches that far. John met his eyes. I have to try. Anna clutched Lily tighter, but said nothing. Mark leaned back, rubbing a hand over his stubble. We'll come with you. Safety in numbers. John hesitated. He hadn't asked for companions. They would slow him down, complicate every decision. But looking at the child, thin and pale, he knew he couldn't say no. Fine, he said at last. But we move at dawn, and we don't stop unless we have to. Mark nodded once. A silent agreement. Chapter 5. Northward. The next days blurred into a hard march. They followed deer paths through the forest, crossed creeks on slick stones, and cut through long meadows where the sun baked their shoulders. Food was scarce. John rationed his supplies carefully jerky, dried fruit, hard biscuits, stretching them as far as he could. Mark brought down a rabbit with a crude snare, and they roasted it over a small fire, but it wasn't enough. Lily grew weaker. She walked when she could, carried by Anna when she couldn't. Her cough grew worse, dry and ragged in the night. John worried constantly about drawing attention. Twice they spotted distant figures moving along the ridges, stragglers, scavengers, maybe worse. They stayed hidden until the shadows passed. On the 7th day, they reached a highway. The road was a graveyard of abandoned cars, crammed bumper to bumper, doors flung open, belongings scattered across the asphalt. Some of the vehicles were burned husks, blackened shells that still reeked faintly of smoke. Lily clung to Anna's hand as they weaved through the wreckage. John kept his hatchet in hand, Mark carrying a length of rebar like a club. The silence of the highway pressed on them, broken only by the distant caw of crows. Halfway across the overpass, John froze. Ahead, one of the cars shifted. Slowly, a figure rose from the far side, a man, gaunt and wild-eyed, clothes torn, clutching a rusted kitchen knife. His gaze locked on them, and more shapes emerged from behind the vehicles. 5 of them, hungry, desperate. Mark swore under his breath. Keep moving, he muttered. Don't show fear. But the scavengers closed in, circling, knives glinting in the grey light. The leader smiled, lips cracked and bloody. Well now, he rasped. Look what we found. Travellers, with food. His eyes lingered on Lily, and the smile widened. And something sweeter. Anna pulled Lily close, horror flashing across her face. Mark stepped forward, raising his rebar. John shifted his stance, hatchet in hand. His heart pounded, but his voice was steady. "You don't want this fight." The leader chuckled, a sound like dry leaves. "I think we do." Then they rushed. The fight was chaos. The first man lunged for John, knife flashing. Instinct took over John, sidestepped and swung his hatchet. The blade sank into the man's shoulder with a sickening thud. He screamed, stumbling back. Mark swung his rebar like a hammer, cracking another scavenger across the skull. The man crumpled, twitching. Anna screamed as one of them grabbed her arm. John tore his hatchet free and charged, burying it into the attacker's side. Blood sprayed across the car door. The leader lunged at Mark, slashing with his knife. The blade cut deep into Mark's arm, but Mark roared and drove the rebar into the man's chest. The scavenger staggered, gasping, before collapsing onto the pavement. The last two fled, disappearing into the maze of wrecked cars. For a long moment, only silence remained. Then Lily began to sob. John's chest heaved, his hands trembling as he pulled the hatchet free. He wiped the blade on his pants, but the blood clung stubbornly. His stomach turned, bile rising in his throat. He had killed before animals, for food, but never people. Never like this. Mark clutched his bleeding arm, teeth clenched. "We need to move." John nodded, forcing the sickness down. He glanced at Anna, who held Lily tight, shielding her eyes from the carnage. They were alive. That was what mattered. But as they left the highway behind, John knew something had changed. The wilderness was no longer their enemy. It was people starving, desperate, broken people that would be the true test of survival. And he wasn't sure he was ready for how far he would have to go to keep them alive. Chapter 6. Ash and Silence. They walked for hours after the highway fight, none of them speaking much. The road sloped north, winding into forest again. The air smelled faintly of smoke, drifting down from the horizon, like a reminder of how fragile the world had become. Mark's wound bled through the strip of cloth John had tied around it. Every few minutes Mark winced, his face tightening, but he said nothing. Pride or stubbornness, John couldn't tell which. Finally, as dusk crept over the trees, John called a halt. "We need shelter, and we need to clean that cut before it festers." Mark gave a curt nod. Anna shifted Lily onto her hip, the girl dozing from exhaustion. They cut into the trees until they found a hollow beneath a cluster of rocks, shielded from wind. John built a small fire, careful to keep the flames low. He boiled water in a tin cup and poured it gently over Mark's wound. Mark hissed, teeth clenched. John muttered, "Hold still," and pulled a small bottle of antiseptic from his kit. He hesitated. Supplies were precious, but infection was deadlier than rationing. "This is going to burn," he said. Mark gave a humorless laugh. "Everything burns now." John poured. Mark swore through gritted teeth, gripping a rock until his knuckles turned white. "Anna, turn."